You gonna put yours up here? Or she's still talking? You wanna put yours up, or are you okay?
No, it's not gonna work there. I'll speak
All right.
with you in a moment when you're done.
All right, everybody ready?
Yes.
Good to go? Today we're here to talk about the Secretary of State Security Division enforcement of certain matters against Morgan Stanley, a national stock exchange brokerage company. And as part of that, you'll see here, and I'll cover in more detail for you what occurred. But first, let me give you the high points of this. Beginning 2 years ago, by recommendation of individuals who had, in fact, been clients of Mr. Wyatt, we began an investigation of certain matters involving the buying and selling of both custom preferred investment portfolios for certain individuals, as well as non-custom preferred. That audit took a significant amount of time and was brought to conclusion here this past week, and we're here to make the announcement. In general terms, what will occur is that the citizens who participated, and there were approximately 259 different accounts in Mississippi, and they varied for 15 different states. 194 were Mississippi accounts, and there are other accounts in Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, and so this is a multi-state investigation that occurred. In those, we have provided and will be funded by September the 9th the sum of $4,243,000, which will be available for the customers and will be discussed as a customer fund, and I'll discuss that with you later. In addition to that, Morgan Stanley has agreed to pay $400,000, which are the expenses of the state of Mississippi in securing these violations against this company. In addition to that, the state of Mississippi funded $100,000 penalty against Morgan Stanley, and they have paid that amount of money. The total amount to be recovered will be $4.7 million, of which you can see $4.2 million will be turned over to the investors who lost funds in this particular matter. Now, I want to go over this in some detail with y'all because I think it's important to the story. Mr. Wyatt was hired by Morgan Stanley. He was an exceptionally successful broker and had a successful history. His employment began in the 2007-2008 time frame. He moved to Morgan Stanley, and at that time, they provided him with a $1.8 million signing bonus as part of a promissory note that was forgiven. In addition, Mr. Zimmerman received a $1.4 million signing bonus to make this transfer. That information was not provided back to the clients and customers of this individual. This custom portfolio that was moved from a former brokerage, Smith Barney, was 246 accounts. Those 246 accounts came over, and when you come over, this is a critical part to this, you have to change your investment portfolio designation. Each person in these accounts was requested to provide them how they wanted their money invested by Mr. Wyatt, and then now consequently by Morgan Stanley. It was a transition team, because this is a significant move, to work with the clients in doing that, to assist. In many instances, these documents were inaccurate, and they were inconsistent data was entered in those documents, professing what the investment portfolio was to be for these particular customers, and in fact what it ended up to be. The Wyatt Group, as it was known at that particular time, was composed of Mr. Wyatt and Mr. Zimmerman. The strategy that they informed the customers was that they would preserve capital and avoid risk, and avoid undue risk. The custom portfolio lacked any defined form and involved a very aggressive short-term trading and rapid turnover, which is how people and brokers make money. It was actually a high-risk investment that was given to these individuals, and the market timing that was unsuitable for most investors. As this matriculated through in June of 2009 through June of 2011, this trading occurred in low-price securities, even though some of these investors had indicated they were risk averse. Further, the asset size and the income size would normally have indicated to anyone that they should have been protecting those assets instead of being in a high-risk venture. On or around May of 2011, Mr. Wyatt abruptly ceased his investment portfolio. Clients made FINRA claims, that's the national brokerage group that oversees brokers. They made claims beginning in 2012 alleging unauthorized and unregistered securities that were sold by Mr. Wyatt outside of Morgan Stanley. Through this process, we will say that Mr. Wyatt has now been assisting the Secretary of State's Office in the Security Division that did this audit. At the end of that, these are the findings that I'll give to you concerning Mr. Wyatt, and then we'll get on to Morgan Stanley and the others. Under the consent order agreed to in this matter by Mr. Wyatt, the respondent recommended unsuitable purchases of securities in violation of the Mississippi Securities Act. The respondent executed trades on behalf of customers without authorization in violation of the Mississippi Securities Act. The respondent mismarked tickets and confirmations and unsolicited when in fact the transaction was solicited in violation of the Mississippi Securities Act. The respondent effected securities transactions not recorded in the regular books in violation of the Mississippi Securities Act. The respondent recommended unsuitable purchases, as I discussed to you earlier, in violation of the Mississippi Securities Act. The respondent failed to disclose substantial signing bonuses that I've just described to you in violation of the Mississippi Securities Act. All of those have been consented to by Mr. Wyatt, and Mr. Wyatt's license to sell securities has now been revoked. The second part of this was when he joined Morgan Stanley. The supervisor for Morgan Stanley was Mr. Brister. Mr. Brister was in charge of ensuring on behalf of Morgan Stanley that in fact that these investments met the portfolio, met the information, and the investment activities by Mr. Wyatt were in accordance with all securities laws, both federal and state. During this particular time, it was obvious and was reported to Morgan Stanley of personal problems with Mr. Wyatt. While those were disgorged to the Human Resources Department, no action was taken by Morgan Stanley to review these documents into detail. Mr. Brister has agreed to an order, which we have here, and concerning his management of the Morgan Stanley branch during the time that this occurred. Under that, Mr. Brister has retired from Morgan Stanley, and his license has been his license with the division has been surrendered by Mr. Brister, and as he is no longer active in the securities business. On Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley was the company that started this whole process here. Was under our regulations, under the regulations of the state of Mississippi and under our laws, is responsible for managing these people. There were two accounts, custom portfolio accounts, which were managed by Mr. Wyatt, as I've indicated to you, and ended up being in high risk, often churned securities. In addition to that, there was a non-custom portfolio that was invested in regular matters. The matters that we're discussing here has to do with Mr. Wyatt's custom portfolio, that part that he was to be managing, he and Mr. Zimmerman. Mr. Brister actually recruited Mr. Wyatt in approximately 2007-2008 category. As they went through this process, they moved the customer portfolio, and Mr. Brister and his office manager were in charge of going forward with providing the necessary information, ensuring its accuracy. They opened the 246 accounts that we discussed earlier. As part of the approval process, Wyatt completed an application in December of 2007 for Morgan Stanley. He described his investment style and philosophy as a process. Between 2009 and 2011, Wyatt did not follow the process that he had described in conducting these investments over a 2-year period. The firm did not verify or question Mr. Wyatt as to why he actually veered from the requirements that he had stated were his investment philosophy. Most of the investors were invested in aggressive growth portfolio, which involved very aggressive and short-term trading. high turnover rates, and for some investors that had low risk tolerance. Some customers did not fully understand the risks that were associated with Mr. Wyatt's trading, and in fact have provided other documentation requesting the contrary. In 2009, Mr. Wyatt was first approached by certain compliance issues between 2009 and 2010. Mr. Wyatt's investment philosophies triggered a number of things that most stock brokerage houses have. When they see excessive trading, or they see people trading in various and sundry things and see high turnover, they are able to look at individuals within their purview who are employees of theirs to determine that they are taking these high risk matters. Morgan Stanley was aware of those matters. In 2009, Mr. Wyatt's trading in his accounts triggered frequent notices to Morgan Stanley. Those were turnover errors. There were errors in documentation and adjustments. And at times, Mr. Wyatt's supervisors expressed a need to implement a plan of slow trading for Mr. Wyatt. That plan was not implemented. In 2011, following an internal investigation by Morgan Stanley, Wyatt was reprimanded by Morgan Stanley for executing trades in a customer's non-discretionary account without receiving concurrent verbal approval. In 2012, the FINRA claims began. Most everyone who signs for a brokerage account has to sign for binding mandatory arbitration. That is done through FINRA and a judge appointed by FINRA. Beginning in 2012, FINRA objections were filed against Mr. Wyatt on a number of different occasions. Some of those have matriculated to final result, others are still pending. During the course of Mr. Wyatt's employment with Morgan Stanley, they on 2 different occasions reprimanded and eventually terminated Mr. Wyatt. Under the Securities Act, we believe that companies such as Morgan Stanley have the duty to supervise their employees. In this matter, we have charged Morgan Stanley with a failure to supervise, and they have agreed to a consent decree, which I have here, that says in some instances they reasonably failed to regulate its agents in the Ridgeland, Mississippi branch. Morgan Stanley has branches all over the world. As part of this, our agency will now require an additional information as to their regulatory efforts and supervisory efforts in the state of Mississippi. Those will be reported to us. We will have them on heightened review to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. As part of that, Morgan Stanley paid for all of the expenses for the state of Mississippi to recover this, and $4.2 million to the customers. Now, we should emphasize that this is a customer fund. It will be funded on September the 9th of this year. We have, in conjunction with Morgan Stanley, we have selected Trustmark National Bank, which will be the supervisor for these funds. That's where the money will be. Each of these investors will now receive correspondence from the Secretary of State's office and from Morgan Stanley informing them of their ability to take this customer fund. It is not mandatory. There are individuals who may have attorneys who want to get the grass out here. There are There are individuals, and I want to emphasize this, there are individuals who may select not to participate in this customer fund. And those individuals may be represented by counsel, and those individuals may pursue these matters in a FINRA claim or in some other court or jurisdiction. That is a decision for each of them to make, not us. On the contrary, those individuals who do not want to proceed further will be able to take their customer fund. That customer fund, once they take it, they will release Morgan Stanley from any other obligation. So it is indeed a selection that each of them made. We have made this available to them. We have found them as breaching the securities laws, the individuals that I've discussed with you and Morgan Stanley, and we have collected a $100,000 fine in that matter. The personal recovery of individual funds is left up to the individual. We have created a customer fund in which you can collect that and if you decide not to collect that, you're welcome to go forward with anything else. I know you're going to ask this, so we'll get right to it. As best we can determine, it's very difficult to determine the losses here because we hired outside experts to do that. We went through the loss calculations based upon losses that began in 2008, 9, and 10. There were certain periods during that period the stock market fell, as you know. So there were other things that we had to take into account. In addition to that, there were numerous FINRA claims against these individuals which have been paid in many instances. So our best guess at this is that there were customer losses somewhere in these custom portfolios, Mr. Wyatt managed somewhere between $15 and $20 million. That number can vary significantly even today as FINRA settlements are issued and people are paid some part of the amounts that make claims against Morgan Stanley. These will provide a base for individuals who want to pursue. They want to get a check, they can do that. If they want to pursue their own legal requirements, there are plenty of lawyers out there and they're happy to do that. So with that, I'll answer any questions you may have. As you know, this is not our first time to do this. Morgan King resulted in a multi-state $200 million settlement. This one is approximately a $5 million settlement. And our office takes customer complaints seriously and we pursue them. Anything, Bobby?
So this will be available to the accounts outside of Mississippi too?
That is correct.
Yeah.
This will be available to all 259 and 15
And
states.
the 259 are just the custom.
Portfolio that was managed by Mr. White.
And this was in the Richland office?
Yes, sir. Ridgeland, not Richland, it's Ridgeland.
RIDGE?
Yes, sir. Emily, any questions?
Are there any criminal charges being brought in this?
We don't do criminal, so we wouldn't have anything to do with that. If so, you'd have to ask the Attorney General or local district attorney.
Would your office refer or work with another agency that might consider criminal charges?
We have consulting agreements with a lot of people on a lot of stuff that we do, regulatory stuff from cemeteries to charities. So always, as you know, we restrict any comment on pending investigations to just that. And we make no comments until such time as we have a signed agreement. Or we take action in a public manner, which would be in court.
So you don't know how many of these 259 already settled through the federal route?
We do have a list of those that have settled, and
Are they included in 259 or
no? The ones that have reached a settlement agreement would not be further compensated because they've released Morgan Stanley.
Okay.
So this would be for people that have not released Morgan Stanley or have a FINRA claim pending. They could go to this.
And there's 259 of those?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
If all 259 of the people, if they all choose to take from the customer fund, would they get an equal part?
No, it depends on how you go about how much your losses were and whatnot. It would be calculated as to, the percentage of what the loss, which would be somewhere, in the 20% maybe, between 15 and 25%.
That's how much they would be able to recover from their losses?
That's correct.
Morgan Stanley's a big firm.
Yes, it is.
And I
We
think
have a lot of lawyers by it.
most people assume when you do business with somebody like Morgan Stanley that maybe they shouldn't, but that they don't have anything to worry about. What would be your recommendation to the average investor?
I'm glad you asked that. The best defense to this is to read what you sign and read your monthly statement. It takes me 2 years to run them down. And then we don't always collect how much money there's involved. Read what you put. When you put a low-risk investment there and you see obvious churning in your account on a monthly basis, you need to make them stop before it gets away from you. Now, there are, in any large entity, there are individuals who don't play by the rules. Mr. White was one of those. So, you need to protect your own self as much as possible. When the people who are watching this, go home, look what you signed. look at what you signed and look at what's going on in your account. Everything is up now. The market is at an all-time high. It covers and hides a lot of problems. When it goes back down, as it has every time, when it goes back down, don't wait till then to discover your money's not there and something was going wrong. So I would encourage all of your investors to look at your portfolio now. While it's all up and all of these things are churning or whatever that may be occurring, and it doesn't occur. 99% of Mississippi's brokers are really good men and women and follow the rules and try the best they can. But there are individuals like this, and this will occur on occasion. Watch your own stuff. That's your retirement. That's the things you worked all your life for. You ought to take at least 5 minutes and make sure that it's running like you want it to.
When you say obvious churning, what do you mean?
When you see, for example, these were low-risk investors, and
Uh-huh.
you saw a number of stocks being bought and sold on your monthly statement. And if you're into that, and some people are, there are some in hedge funds, there's all kinds of different things, and if you want to do that, certainly the market's available for you. If you want to do low-risk investments and you expect 50 or 75% of yours to be in some fixed income bond portfolio, and you see a stock you never saw before, that's a key. Go look. Ask them why they did that. Sometimes even internally they'll make mistakes. And we found that in this instance. You know, there's internal mistakes that are made when they put your portfolio with mine or some other things are done. All of those happen. There's human error even in today's world and everything. But read what you wrote. Make sure they're doing what you told them to do. It's your money.
Given the other settlements and volatile stock market at the time or whatever, I mean, do you feel like these people are being made relatively whole
Well,
by this?
the losses that occurred were between the uncompensated ones that we can best determine from our information belief that we received from Morgan Stanley during the course of our investigation. Is between $15 and $20 million.
Oh, those were not counting the other
So-
settlements.
Right, that's after the other settlements have
Okay.
occurred. We believe there was between $15 and $20 million that were not paid at a specific point in time when we did our look. There have been some paid since then, Jeff, so I'm not really sure what the final number would be. But, you know, obviously Morgan Stanley would take the position where there were market losses, you know, and there were these kind of issues. So obviously when they have a consent, they did not, while they consented to this order, they did not admit or deny anything. And so there certainly was another side that, well, maybe the market did all of this. But it is the position of the state of Mississippi that this individual was not properly supervised, and that caused these losses. In the end, we collected $4.7 million for people who want it, and the others can pursue further if they desire to.
Are these across the state, or are they concentrated?
They're all over.
Are they
Most of
concentrated
them
mainly
are in
metro area?
the metro area here. I think, I believe it's in the press release, but there's, the other states are in here. I believe Kentucky and Alabama are two of the largest ones. I don't have it, but most of this was done, most of these investors would have been in the capital area.
Did those states help you, or did y'all pretty much do all the work?
We did the work on this one. Much like Morgan Keegan, we started on Morgan Keegan, and then we had significant help from Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, in that particular one, and eventually the Securities and Exchange Commission. But this was more of a local matter here. Morgan Keegan was really a Memphis individual in their bond fund, and it was sold literally all over the world. So that was a bigger one on down. They had thousands of accounts. This one is relatively narrow. Other questions? Jeff, anything? Y'all make sure they read them. You know, read your statement. And where you need us to enforce Mississippi law, we're going to do that. But I much prefer you to read your statement. All right, well, I'll hang around for anybody that wants to do any one-on-ones. I know you do.
Yeah.
Yes,
Anybody
ma'am.
who would like to represent about